I'm the DevSecOps and Product Development Director at VerSprite. A little bit of background about me. We do security automation, so DAST tools, SaaS tools, pipelines, and everything security comes naturally for us. I'm also the OWASP C-Serve project leader. I have multiple contributions in different open source tool sets. Previously, I worked at Project Discovery. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nuclei, SubFinder, and all these other tools. If you're not, it's an open source vulnerability scanner. Give it a try. Before that, actually, one of the things that I'm going to cover, I was a security champion, technical owner, lead developer at a fintech corporation. And that's one of the ways how I got into security, even though there wasn't an open security role at the company that I was working for. So today, let's talk about enterprise DAST tools, problems that we have faced, and how can you actually solve it with some creativity. So what is the promise, right? Usually, everybody comes with, all the vendors come with their tool sets, and they let you know, just pay this tool, point, click, secure. You have the security automated for the next year. You can check out the compliance part, and sleep well at night, okay? Well, obviously, we paid for it. Awesome, we're good, right? But then you have the results. You have some self-site certificates detected, but it's normal, right? It's the dev environment, so you don't care much about it, right? You have some missing security headers, some cumbersome ones that you haven't even heard about. It doesn't really make a difference. They are all informational. Usually no critical vulnerabilities found, and yeah, mission accomplished, right? Everyone's happy. But then, actually, there may be a board developer, like I was a few years back, who has found multiple vulnerabilities manually. So I knew for a fact that there are HTML injection, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, some critical SQL injection vulnerabilities I managed to exploit previously, and broken authorization everywhere, right? So the question arises, what did the scanner actually test, right? So on today's journey, I'm going to present 2 use cases that relate to dynamic application security testing and how to overcome them. The first one is going to be about a single-page application, a huge application, would call it legacy application, that was developed throughout, 20 years by 10 different teams that were working together. It used, we may actually call it an obscure JavaScript framework called XJS, which is also an enterprise-grade framework for that matter. And the tool in this particular case is that I'm going to talk about is a desktop tool. Enterprise-grade, expensive one, multi-$1,000 per year per seat, and how we have basically replaced that with another tool and solve the issues. On the second use case, I'm going to talk about more modern, cloud-based SaaS enterprise DAST tools, another, different complex authentication flows that it couldn't handle, the visibility problem, and so on and so forth. All right, so talking about the first use case, right? The setup. We had a fintech company that had a lot of Fortune 50 and Fortune 500 clients. As I previously mentioned, an XJS single-page application. A fairly complex, non-RESTful JSON-based API that usually these different tools cannot really handle or comprehend. Only 2 or 3 actual endpoints because everything else was handled by the internal logic within the JSON, and also the routing happened on the front end and so on. And this DAST tool, a few years back, it was like $8,000 per year per seat, right? So it's not super expensive, but it's not on the cheap side either, depending on the size of the company, right? So we have executed some scans, right? We had the self-site certificates, we had missing X-frame options, header, the CSP, the content security that always can be improved, so no news there, right? Potential click jacking, nobody cares about that, but there were no SQL injection vulnerabilities, no cross-site scripting and so on. Everyone was happy. Well, except myself. I was really curious how the tool works. It was the first time I've actually seen it and wanted to dig a little bit deeper, right? So everyone's super happy. We are secure. We don't need to spend more money on security. All right, so I started investigating, pulled up the advanced configurations, wanted to see what are the different scan rules that can be enabled, what are the different configurations that I can play around with. I did everything in there, made sure that I had the exclusion list. You know, you want to make sure that the logout endpoints are not included in the scan because it might log out your session while doing the scan, of course. And then the result, well, not much change. So yeah, we need to go deeper. There's no visibility in the tool. Probably it's usually a given. They don't want you to see all the internal payloads that are being sent out, or I don't know what the reasoning behind that is. They want to make it easy to use, I guess, or at least that's what they claim. So since I had access to the application, what I did, I have enabled debug logging in the target application, right? So first step, being a developer, easy peasy. So I started seeing that there were a lot of 404s. I started seeing admin, config, backup, and other directories in the log. And then I was like, okay, this seems like a plain old simple directory brute forcing on a single page application that has a Java backend, which doesn't make any sense, right? So then, starting from the next step, what can we do about it? Well, I found an option that it had a proxy, right? Well, cool, let's just run it through VerSprite in that case, and let's see what the requests are made of, right? So the conclusions were that the tool managed to successfully authenticate, right? But it stopped at the landing page, it couldn't crawl anything, and it started directory brute forcing for hours. So basically we were looking at the scan, it was running for 4 hours, yeah, and we saw the results. Not much to do about it, right? Now, unfortunately, we don't have sound for this, but you can just imagine. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, cool. So what was the reaction, especially of management? You know, the false sense of security, shattered, obviously. But they seem to have been more annoyed, you know. Now we need to really do something about it. Okay, let's just allocate one person to do security, right? We are a software development company. We don't really care about security. But, I mean, not officially, right? Or well, internally, we don't care. Publicly, we are champions, obviously, right? So that was the first time I got, quote-unquote, promoted or invited to be a security champion. Now, as you can imagine, it's not a promotion. You have more work to do. And what they give you, well, maybe from the 2-week sprints, you have 1 day that you can spend on security. But also, it was, you know, super fine for me. I enjoyed it. Let's see how we can solve this properly, right? With the right mentality. So challenges. How to scan an API or a web application that only has 2 or 3 endpoints. Everything is in JSON payloads. Can't generate proper Swagger or Opera API specs because it's not RESTful, right? The scanner doesn't understand the structure. And also, one of the big issues that we had that there was no test data, right? So you may end up in a situation in which you have 2 parameters, and if you don't have test data in your database, the database is not seeded with data, then the code won't even actually arrive to the second statement, which is vulnerable. I don't know if I have a pointer. Yeah, I don't know about it. Either way, you can see on the screen the first part of the SQL statement is a properly created prepared statement, right? And there's an early return in case you don't have a company created. So you won't be able to actually get into this line where it has string concatenation, where you can actually do SQL injection, right? So basically, you want to make sure that there is test data in the application that you're testing, right? Okay. So, heavy thinking. What can we do about this? Well, I already managed to convince management to buy a few VerSprite licenses, the pro ones, cool. Being a technical lead, I had access to the code base and to a development team, so they can help me out with some of the parsing that we wanted to do. And we had integration tests, luckily, so that was a given. So the whole idea was to ditch the scanner. That doesn't work. It was a bold idea. I don't even know how I managed to convince them to put in that much effort into this, but we managed to do that. So we wanted to generate our own API descriptors by parsing the code using abstract syntax trees and all the bells and whistles. We have also identified that there were a few endpoints that actually used enums, so static values, which is awesome because we can then generate permutations for those endpoints, and then create an automation that is more flexible and basically can guide the scans. It can do a little bit of hand-holding, right? Alrighty, so challenge accepted. Let's get started. Well, let me actually go back. Okay, so this is how the automation flow looked like. Super simplified one. There's no point in going into details, but the whole idea in this particular case, since it was a Java application, the build tool was Maven. So it's super easy to automate. Let's just build some automation around it that can talk to Burp Suite plugins. So the first step was I've created a Burp Suite plugin that can take a custom API descriptor that we have created with all the JSON structures and such, and it also can basically ingest from that API descriptor file the injection points where the parameters need to be inserted. So let's just say that we are taking from a 2-page long JSON, we want to only inject into a specific parameter that we know that is relevant. Then I'm going to tell Burp Suite, okay, well, do one scan, a custom scan against this endpoint with this body, and between positions 10 and 15, just insert your payloads and analyze the responses, right? So basically with that approach, I have triggered thousands of scans, mini ones, right, that can run for, I don't know, a minute or so. And then I've aggregated the results. But given that we wanted to make this to be fully automated from CI/CD, right? We want to be compliant, at least on paper, SOC 2 and everything, right? So we needed the automation. How can you do that? Well, Burp Suite Pro is not meant to be automated. For that, you have the enterprise version for, I don't know, 20 times the price, 15, I don't know. But there are ways for that as well. We created another plugin, another extension. And then from Maven, we had a Maven plugin that was able to start Burp Suite. It loaded all the different user and project configurations. It disabled the interceptor, it configured the proxy, it loaded the right plugins, extensions needed and such. And then it was listening on a socket where you could say, okay, these are the endpoints. Start the scan. Once you've finished, let us know. Let me ingest or aggregate the data back, upload it as an artifact, and if there are high findings, just break the scan, right? Straightforward, at least on paper. So, the first component, I actually walk you through this. We have generated the API endpoints, the parameters, the enum permutations, and the payload positions. Then on component 2, the extensions, the Maven plugin that launches Burp Suite, and so on and so forth. All right, then we get to component 3, the test data awareness. Well, given that the integration tests were already executed in the pipeline, we just had to set it up so that the data will not be deleted before we start the DAST scan. We used the pre-integration test phase for that. Seeded the data and make sure that everything is on point. Then the bonus point in here was the code coverage, right? So I'm just using an example here with Jacoco. It's again a Java example, but the idea is bytecode instrumentation, right? So if you're familiar with running unit tests, the nice thing about them is that you can see what were the exact lines of code that were executed for the unit test, right? And you can say you have, I don't know, 60% code coverage for the application. Now, taking the same exact idea, we can apply it for running DAST scans as well. You just need to make sure once the integration test has executed, you just need to reset the counter, right? And make sure that afterwards it's still in place. So at the end, you can see your DAST tool managed to cover, let's say, 20% of your application. Now, if you want to combine this together with your SaaS tool, which can tell you that there are 100 potential vulnerabilities in component X, in that particular case, you can then focus, okay, what did it go wrong on the DAST side that we have not covered that component that seems to be the most vulnerable, right? So you have insights. So at least you know what you're not testing. You can take decisions from here. All right, so the results for the first use case was that we have a relevant DAST scan executed from CI/CD, we have coverage visibility, we have automated reports, and we can break the pipelines if there are high findings, not to mention that it was like 25 times cheaper, obviously not including labor, right? So that was, let's see, one of the first use cases that I implemented from a security perspective. All right, now let me walk you through a more recent use case that included a much bigger client with a much more expensive tool. So again, the setup, talking about a large enterprise client, Fortune 500, it already paid a lot of money for a DAST platform, actually an AppSec platform that has DAST capabilities, right? It's a much more expensive tool. It can be up to, I looked it up, some people are paying up to $1 million per year for the specific tool, so pretty expensive, right? The application was also much more complicated, more than 1,000 REST endpoints, at least it was REST, right? But it had a complex incremental authentication. And since this was a consulting engagement, we had no access to the application, we had no access to the logs, we couldn't do the general tweaking like in the previous use case, right? So how do you actually take it from here, right? So the failure cascade that we have started with, the scanner couldn't handle the incremental authentication. Oh wow, that's a bummer. What do we mean by incremental authentication? Simple use case like you see it in Gmail. It first asks for your username, then you need to click next. Then it asks for your password, then you click next, and so on and so forth, right? So the built-in simple form-based authentication where you just provide your username and password and you hit next to scan, which is the promise, right, for that amount of money, that wasn't working. Another problem that we have seen, well, yeah, solution in that particular case, you want to make sure that it works at least afterwards, right? So you are providing a session manually. You log into the application, you take out the session tokens, you put it into the tool, and see what happens, right? The second problem that we had, it couldn't discover more than 1,000 endpoints. It just couldn't. We have started looking at the crawling, nothing happened, the authentication wasn't working, we couldn't figure it out from the first, let's say from the beginning, because we didn't have access to the logs, and the enterprise-grade tool didn't provide us information either. So, at least we had Swagger on OpenAPI specification that was generated by the client. All right, thank you for that. Send it over, 70,000 lines of JSON, or YAML actually. You know, what can go wrong? Well, I spent the next 4 hours debugging the JSON because the application wasn't able to parse it. It just said, parsing error. Sorry. Okay, well, we have managed to get over that as well somehow, right? And then we realized that for the authentication to work, you need both security headers and cookies, right? Nice combination. Unfortunately, it was not working. We get 401. Again, an expensive tool, next, and it doesn't work. What can we do about it? So yeah, it's foggy in the clouds. We don't have application logs, no access, no scanner logs because it's a cloud platform, no error details, it's just 401, right? We don't know where my configured headers are, where are my cookies, you know, it's a total blind spot. We can't see shit. But at least it's easy to set up the scans, right? So we have professional services, everyone's smiling, you can set up a meeting with them. After 3 weeks, you can even meet them. Then they realize the right person is not on the call, you know, yada, yada. So you need to take things into your hands, right? And then there was the revelation. If you can't control any of the sides, well, you sit in the middle, right? We are quite familiar with this one. But how can you actually achieve that, right? There's no proxy button on the SaaS tool just to tell it, okay, I want everything to go through this, right? It's not how it works. Well, there is a way, right? You can create a reverse proxy. And if you basically start attacking your reverse proxy, then you can log all the requests and responses that are being made, okay? And then the proxy or the middleware, whatever we want to call it, it will forward to the real target. This way we can do, this way we can achieve full visibility, right? Cool. So based on the newly gained insights, looking at the proxy logs, the configured authentication headers are missing. We only see either the headers or the cookies. And we kind of realized it is a scanner bug. We are talking about a multi-million-dollar company, vendor, tool, whatever, that has a major bug from my perspective. But you won't have the time to figure it out with them, wait for them to solve it. Actually, we do have technical partnership relationship with most major enterprise DAST tools, and I know for a fact we have built out integrations for them, official ones and so on the platforms that we develop ourselves. I know that they are super, super slow. The client is not going to wait for that. So we need to find a way. Additionally, there was an interesting functionality or business use case in the application and the web application firewall. If you didn't have the referrer header correctly configured or it was missing, it automatically dropped your request. Well, easy peasy, we just add a custom referrer header in the tool, right? Well, not quite, because there are some, let's say, deny lists in the tool that doesn't let you set certain headers, like you cannot change the host header, you cannot change the referrer header, and so on and so forth. Well, it's kind of a bummer, right? Again, facing the issues with these tools. Okay. So what was the plan then? Well, let's do authentication using a headless browser, right? We have chosen to work with Playwright in this particular case. You can also do Selenium. There are a lot of different frameworks that you can use. Then once you have logged in using the headless browser, you can extract the cookies and the headers. Now, given that you cannot use both cookies and headers, what can you do? Well, we can create a custom cookie header that contains the base64 version encoding of the cookies, right? We pass it on to our middleware, and our scanner will know that the custom cookies will need to be transformed from headers to cookies, right? Pretty much straightforward. Then we also know that we can add the denied headers, referrer header, in our middleware, right? And then we can also log everything. So this is the simplified flow of how it looked. We have Playwright, logs into Okta, incremental login, extract everything that is related to the session, pass it to the DAST tool. So we had a template created. We were using the API for the enterprise DAST tool to configure the session. And then we tell the DAST tool, well, you know what? Just attack this other URL that I control that will actually redirect everything to the target web application. And, well, in this particular case, we have used the AWS infrastructure. We had a Lambda, and the Lambda stored all the requests and responses to the database. And I actually do have a short demo of this. Let's see if it's going to work. All right, so in this particular case, again, simplified flow. Let me just try and stop it in here so I can talk about it. Yeah, okay, so the custom authentication started against a specific endpoint on Okta, but in this particular case, I'm attacking an interact SH subdomain that I've just spun up with a project discovery tool. The only thing it does, it echoes back a specific message to you every time, and you can track on the application interface what what DNS requests, HTTP requests, and so on were initiated against this particular application. Then within the browser, launching the interactive headless session for the login, gathering the headless sign-in, and so on and so forth. We do have actually an example on how it generated the base64 version of the X-custom cookie. Not that it is super complicated. Let's see. Continue on that. Okay, and it initiates a scan through the API of the scanner tool, and then after a few moments it just stops it, because we are not going to wait up to 4 days until it finishes, at least according to the tool. So going on the database side, we can see the requests that were made, and we can also see the requests cookies. We do see there is a session ID in there that was automatically added. We do see a referrer header. In this particular case, it's DefCamp, user agent, authorization, bearer token, and everything is in place. And then there's the response. So awesome. We have achieved something here, right? All right, so the results. We have managed to successfully authenticate the scanner. We have managed to bypass the tool limitations. We had full visibility into the request. We have managed to automate it into CI/CD. That's a totally different topic. We have clients with more than 2,000 repositories, enterprise-grade DAST tools, and they have only operationalized it for the top 10 of them, right? How do you achieve let's say, visibility across all your organization if you only using these tools on 10 of your applications. And the issue that they were facing is that, well, you need to create manual CI/CD pipelines for 1,000, 2,000 repositories. That's a different automation topic. It can be done, but these are, let's say, issues that we face with these clients on a daily basis. Now, there are some downsides as well. There are additional costs, the AWS infrastructure, and the development time, right? So it doesn't come cheap from that perspective. Once you have set it up, you have made sure that everything works as expected. Well, you will still have costs, but at least you can cut the database part. You don't need insights on a continuous manner. You just make sure that it works, disable that part, and then the rest should be, fairly cheap for a multi-billion-dollar company that already pays hundreds of thousands for the enterprise DAST tool. So some additional cost on the AWS side shouldn't be a problem, right? So it's something, right? Okay, so looking at the lessons learned, right? Where are the different use cases that we can see where DAST tools fail? Well, when the authentication is complex, when you have incremental authentication, multi-step flows, if you have token-based authentication or certificate-based authentication, incremental verification, when you have modern architectures that use fairly complex JSON schemas, single-page applications, GraphQL endpoints, and such. And yeah, the problem is that tools don't report what they missed, right? So the false negatives are actually worse than the false positives, right? False positives you can triage, but you don't know what you don't know. And yeah, silent failures make it look like a success. So, well, don't just leave yet. So taking the generalist mindset, or let's call it, the reason why we are hackers is because we are trying to think out of the box, right? So the important part is don't accept that it doesn't work as a final response. Treat the tools, especially if they are web applications, as APIs, not just black boxes. You can basically look into how they are working. And actually, if you want to achieve fuzzing and you know where to look exactly, well, maybe try some open source tools, like Nuclei for that matter. Developer skills are also security skills. I mean, developers already understand what is going on in the back-end side, what is going on the front-end side. You just need to add that critical thinking on top in order to, well, may I say, achieve greatness. Then building observability into everything. Yeah, as if you are interested in your performance statistics, why aren't you interested in your security statistics as well? And yeah, you need to automate it, otherwise it won't scale. So if you are a security champion, what I would like to advise you is to validate the tool coverage manually first. Don't just trust the green check marks. Instrument your apps for visibility, logs, metrics, traces. Learn to extend tools, create plugins, APIs, scripts. There's the Z-Attack proxy. You can create extensions for that. The community is very open. As I mentioned, Nuclei, same thing. You have a community, you have Discord channels, you can talk to people, they are going to help you out. If you want to build out Burp Suite extensions, there are already a lot of them, right? You can automate different things. Now you have basically AI as well that can help you understand the documentation. It can create for you the boilerplate and so on and so forth. And yeah, obviously understanding the tech stack deeply, well, you cannot secure what you don't understand, of course. So talking to security engineers, yeah, proxy everything for debugging, well, building a middleware for transformation. Don't fight the tool, try to adapt it. You can also put everything under version control. Otherwise, you may end up like myself, needing to recreate the infrastructure that I've done a few months back at 2 in the morning before the conference to show a 1-minute video about it. So it makes sense to put it on GitHub. And then, yeah, script the automation. For decision makers, before you buy a tool, well, do a POC against your applications, right? They are more than willing to help you out with it. Don't just buy it and then forget about it because you are not going to use it. Vendor demos, they do sound way too nice to be true. You need to budget for the integration. You need to evaluate if there is extensibility. You can also consider if you are, let's say, a smaller company that cannot afford big budgets for big application security tools. Well, look for alternatives. Open source may actually be a good option for you, and then you can scale afterwards. Even with open source, if you start having thousands of vulnerabilities, until you solve them, you will have time to think of how can I spend my security budget on another tool that is going to double the amount maybe, or let's just say, I don't know, add 20% on top. Either way, you won't have the budget to handle all of them. And yeah, account for staffing needs. Don't just think that tools are going to run for themselves. So again, before buying, test your authentication flow, your API structure, verify the coverage, check the false positive rates, see if you can include it in CI/CD, extensibility, and, well, most importantly, calculate the real cost of ownership, which is the licensing and the integration. And yeah, the message, don't let the brochure dictate what's possible. When tools fall short, get creative. The best security engineers, in my perspective, hack their own tools. And security is not about buying solutions, it's rather about solving problems. Alrighty, this was it.
Questions?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I'm open for questions. It seems that everything was super clear. Everybody understood everything. Happy to hear that. Happy to see that.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a question. What was that expensive enterprise tool? Can you say the name, or you're not allowed?
You may need to bribe me after the presentation.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
So, how much time it took you to obtain the results for both cases?
Altogether?
Yeah, separate, altogether.
Given the complexity, and as I presented this, I tried to be as simplistic as possible. There were a lot of other issues that we had to face, we had to solve. I would say the first use case that involves multiple plugins that needed to be created and such, that was a little bit over a month, maybe 1.5 months or so.
Sounds reasonable. I was expecting more.
Yeah, well, I didn't say how many people worked on it.
Okay, fair enough.
So the parsing part, I have given it to some of my senior colleagues, so there was actually, we managed to do that in under a week, so that was fairly acceptable. And for the rest, yeah, 1 or 2 persons working for a month, but we were also, juggling with other priorities, like working in a company that doesn't want to hire security personnel. If you are a security champion, you are the judge, the jury, the executioner. You find the bugs, you automate them, you fix them, you do, you triage them and everything. So
sounds like Eastern Europe, yes.
And actually, these are all companies that are pretty big. One had, let's say, offices in Romania or within Eastern Europe, including Kazakhstan and whatnot. But the other company is a US company, actually.
So all this started with a hunch, just a hunch.
Come again?
All this started with a hunch that you observed actually and spent so much time based on a hunch?
The first one, that was, first of all, boredom. It was boring to develop on a legacy application, so I wanted something new, and I had to force myself into doing some security work. And yeah, then afterwards it was a pretty good, let's call it an educated guess, that since I found vulnerabilities before, these tools weren't doing anything, so I had to look into it. On the second use case, it was a given. The client knew. It was a big client. They knew that it's not going to be trivial. That's why it's outsourced to us, right? So in that particular case, let's say it took us like 2.5 weeks to come up with, well, first of all, reverse engineer, quote unquote, all the requests and see that, okay, we have a bug, we have this and that. And then, yeah. What was the second part of your question?
No AI involved in this?
No. Okay. We didn't. Well, actually, there was AI involved for creating the CloudFormation template. Nobody likes to create CloudFormation or infrastructure templates. We have the AI for that. But initially, we have created it manually, the application gateway, the lambdas and everything. It's not that super, super complicated once you have the idea that you want to follow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're getting started.
Thank you for presentation. My question is, do you have any ideas or principles to reduce false positives on DAST results?
Wow, that's a long answer. I cannot give you a short one, to be honest. Yeah, you can leverage AI to basically triage some of the findings, but if you are using the out-of-box solutions, you don't have control, right? With the false positive, the first use case where we have generated the API descriptors, where we had full control, we just said, okay, you know what, scanner, I want you to test exactly this part with the payloads. Yeah, there you can do that. Now, there are also other tools like interactive application security testing that can communicate, the DAST tool itself can communicate with the cold chain analysis through the collaborator, for example, and then there is a little bit of back and forth. You can actually see that the payload that was, let's say, sent by the DAST tool, it went down the chain unmodified, and you can see it, okay, it went until this particular this particular endpoint, or not endpoint, method, and yeah, maybe cross-correlation it with SaaS tools would be a good idea. I have not done that yet. I still have it in the back of my head, but you know, I need to find a client that is willing to pay for it.
It will be expensive. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the presentation again. I would have a question about how exactly did you use the integration tests when trying to actually make the DAST scan much better? Like, did you run the integration test and then proxy all the requests and then feed them into the DAST tool, or did you just run the DAST tool and then run the integration test while that is running?
That's a really good question. Initially, the only reason why I used the integration test because they created the data that I needed, the test data in the application. And I just made sure that the cleanup part was commented out, right? So that was the initial reason why I did that. I was also thinking of running, I actually executed everything to a proxy. Again, you can do that through Maven as well. But at that point in time, there was no AI. So the correlation of identifying from the URLs, the endpoints, to be able to identify which one is a parameter and which isn't, even if you do the cross-correlation, it's not a trivial problem. So at that point in time, I didn't do that. I was thinking of that. Now maybe I should give it a try with AI.
Yeah, thanks. So still, now that you said about cleanup, how would you manage that, given that, for example, when running the DAST scan with an active scan would create a lot of dummy data, and you would have at some point to clean that up so that other scans further won't be affected by the previous one?
You mean after a full scan or during a scan?
After a full scan, yeah.
Well, after the full scan, you can just nuke the whole database and redo it from scratch, right?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan,
Find
I
me
guess.
after the presentation and we can talk details. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.